You're listening to 4CRB's interviews and talkback series.
It's a very good morning and welcome to Supreme Court Judge David Ashton Lewis. Good morning, David.
Good morning to you, Colin. Good morning, everyone, and a particular good morning to all those nameless people out there who tune in every Thursday, because we know you have names, but you just haven't told us. So good morning to you, Lynn. Good morning to you, Somerset.
All right. Well, we thrashed around on a few topics. We note that the Olympics seems to be dominating the news cycle at the moment. We also note, yes, the American election is still very much in our face.
Oh gosh, yes.
But we thought we'd pick a different topic today, David. Do you want to lead in?
Well, I will, only because you chickened out. And I just want all the listeners, to know.
Viewers?
Yeah, I must be getting a bit
Paul
demented.
Hogan, it sounds like.
Yeah. No, that the show is, I think it is popular, and the compliments I receive regularly in the different days that I do different work during the week, and always the compliments are not just for me. They are for Colin and the judge. And so
Used to be for Steve and Hilton, but, I've just taken the next chair.
And I have to admit this on air. My son Somerset, who we all heard a couple of weeks ago, said to me the other day, "Your show, Dad, with Colin is so good." And I hope you don't mind me saying, but I like Colin more than I like you.
Well, that's understandable.
Yeah, that's the spirit. Now,
all right. Patting on the shoulder isn't usually something that I appreciate or do very well at.
You run like a mile from it.
So at the end of the day, let's move on to PTSD.
Right, we will move on. We thought today we would discuss PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. So if we start off with an official interpretation of it by the Mayo Clinic, a world-renowned clinic or hospital facility. I think it's in Maryland in the United States. And it defines a post-traumatic stress disorder is a mental health condition that's triggered by a terrifying event, either experience it or witnessing it. Symptoms may include flashbacks, nightmares, and severe anxiety, as well as uncontrollable thoughts about the event. So I think if we focus in, it is a mental health condition that is triggered by a terrifying event. Now, people, I think, are forgiven for always putting the weight on ex-servicemen, military people, but it can happen to anyone with anything. So it can happen witnessing a traumatic accident where the person's come across and witnessed the dead bodies before the proper authorities get there and provide cover. So I thought we would have a good discussion about that, because I'm aware, as are you, that currently in our society, and it's mainly amongst, again, military people that you hear all about it, but there's probably just as many non-military people who are currently suffering from PTSD and struggling through it.
I think it's like most mental issues, David, that you see it. You can see differing variations of it. So I've seen it in general day-to-day life. I had an employee in a previous business who was yelled at pretty much for about a year by a terrible builder at the time, who will remain nameless. And at the end of that contract, just really struggled when his phone rang to pick up the phone.
Yes.
So that is a form of it to a point, and I've seen it with friends and family who've gone through terrible divorce settlements or divorce proceedings.
Yes.
Not wanting to look at their email, not wanting to pick up a phone,
yes.
Just because it could be terrible news or it could be another stressful event.
Yes, and it just like any mental health condition, some people handle it better than other people. Some people virtually get paralyzed in life and can do nothing. Others soldier on through it and say, look, you know, others have got it worse than me. So, and I have the experience of my own father. He was, I've said it before on the show, he was involved in small group behind Japanese lines operations. 4, occasionally 6 men, but usually 4, going out and doing things. And right towards the end of his life, he admitted that one of our tasks, not every time we went out, to the Japanese-held islands and either blew up bridges or blew up ammunition dumps or whatever they had to do. But one of the tasks was at different times kill certain Japanese officers, just execute them.
Sure.
And then they had to, as I think I've said in the past, he and the 3 other men had to take the bodies of these executed Japanese officers or officer and take it out to sea and dump it because of what the Japanese would do to the local village people if the body was found near a village. And so he came home after the war and he just froze. He had married my mother in 1944, but when he came home, all the expectations of his brothers and sisters in 1945, he'll get back on into life. Now, he was a farming boy, and he shot wild pigs, he shot foxes, he shot rabbits, he shot 6 sheep. I think I've said, he said to me I would never shoot a kangaroo, and he never shot a kangaroo. He was really good handler of a firearm, and in the Special Forces they all carried submachine guns, so they could let go a lot. Now, he came home and he just froze from mid-1945 till the beginning of 1947, and it became so bad he said to my mother, look, divorce me, because I can give you nothing, and I'll agree to anything. Now, he explained to me, I was a young adult then, that giving nothing was exactly that. He couldn't stand her touching him. He couldn't stand the sight of raw meat. My mother would bring it home and have to hide it in the icebox, because if he saw it. Yes. And he just retreated into a world of his own. He slept on a couch for 18 months.
Yes.
Wouldn't sleep with her in bed. And then the worst tragedy happened, which he blamed himself for the rest of his life. I would have an older brother now, born in 1946, late 1946, or mid-40. He would have been born late 46. And my mother suffered from a disease or a disorder in pregnancy called placenta previa, which meant the baby had to be caesarean sectioned. They didn't know, and so the baby suffocated as a perfectly near-birth, near-term baby. My father blamed himself for that because my mother went to him and she was just blood on her nightie. And he froze. He said, I couldn't do anything. I just fell on the floor. I couldn't look at her. So it has terrible ramifications. Now, fortunately for my sister and I, it ended with him at about mid-1947. So she was, my sister was born in mid-1948, and I was born in 1950. And my father, when once asking, so how did you come through it? How did this cure you? And he had no hesitation saying, it was your mother's not giving up on me and her love for me that pulled me through it. But he went right through the rest of his life. He went back to hunting with his older brothers and fishing and doing all of those things. But he constantly reviled at killing.
Sure, and we can see all of those, the old footage. I remember the black and white footage of the World War I guys coming home and basically a bag of trembling flesh, basically.
Well, I think it has happened now. During the First World War, and the British, I think they probably still have it, have the death penalty for cowardice. Australia didn't. After the Boer War and the Breaker-Morant affair, the Australian Prime Ministers said no Australian will be subject to the death penalty. Now, what happened in that time, the First World War, was dreadful. Men having to just get into dugouts as massive high explosive shells rained, one every couple of minutes or every minute for 24 hours, and you do see the early footage of men shaking. Now, those men were accused, on the whole, not all of them, were accused of cowardice. And in the First World War, 379 men were shot, executed for cowardice. And about 5 years ago, petitions went into the British Parliament because of our knowledge of medical understanding of PTSD and being shell-shocked. They were all pardoned, so that the descendants of those families could not, but now could put their head up and say that their great-grandfather or whatever was pardoned by the British government.
And look, it's funny, and as you say, we fast forward now and we have a greater understanding of the human body. We have a greater understanding of medicines. We have a greater understanding of illnesses. And it is funny now looking back on some of those stories. One of the stories I remember reading about World War I was that one of the commanding officers was basically just standing there gibbering to himself and unable to give anyone any direction.
Yes.
That's just petrified. That's just fear.
Well, I think, again, as the definition said, it's a mental health condition that is triggered by a terrifying event.
Sure.
Now, none of us, that's, I think, why the generation of the First World War and the Second World War, their sons mainly, are held by those who are interested and revered as two generations that'll never be repeated.
Sure.
Because they went through things, I think in many ways, to assure us of the life that we currently live. They went through things that we will never go through, we will never experience. And so there's at least a greater understanding now, but there needs to be even more, and there needs to be better support than what there is, and not covering it up. And it's up to each individual who does suffer it to decide how much they want to speak about it and how much they want others to know about it.
Look, I think it's funny. It's like what the conversation we're having here this morning, David. And again, because we're spending a bit of time in with the Indigenous community and other multicultural communities, storytelling is a big part of their culture. And to me, we need to get back to the grassroots of storytelling, because you'll hear stories of families who grew up with a father who went to World War II but was very distant when he came home, basically didn't show any sort of real emotion or interest in what was going on. I remember reading or hearing another story of some cousins who had a father who went to World War II and was on a boat that was dive bombed by Japanese. Basically, they just organised themselves after school and worked out who was going to do what and sorted it all out, and that's the way it worked, because Dad was just too busy in his own head.
Yeah. And so I think there needs to be more public education about this, because, again, I stress, it's not just about war and people who have gone through war. There's probably people amongst each and everyone listening here today, people around them, people that they know, people who they have known, who are suffering in some degree this mental health condition triggered by the most terrifying events.
And I find at times that we can be very intolerant of others around us, and I think that the road rage component is part of that, because you don't know what's going on in their lives at the time, whether they've just made a mistake, a momentary lapse in reason, or they've had some sort of major event in their lives to cause those sort of problems as well. You just don't know. There are still some strange people out there today.
Oh, look, this is part of life, part of society, but again, I think of, obviously, in my position as both a barrister and as a judge, and, I'll say this frankly, I've seen some women who have been gang raped commit suicide, could never get over it. I've seen another young woman, 31, 5'4" Irish woman, gang raped over 18 hours, and she just totally moved on from it. And when I asked her, how were you able to do that? And she said, I looked at all the good around me, and there was far more good around me than evil. And evil of different sorts happens to everyone.
Look, it's funny, mate. Everybody deals with things in different ways. I've seen people deal with fear and they completely freeze up.
Yes.
They cannot think,
yes.
They cannot function. And maybe in a different environment, they're the type of people in a war that may very well have frozen at the wrong moment and been killed.
Yes.
And then you see people who are able to just power on through and deal with it afterwards.
Yes.
And that is just how we're all made up.
It is and it's not a sign of weakness, the ones who can't power on. I think we've finally got to the stage in our medical understanding of, shell shock or cowardice, that it's none of those things. It's the psychological effect on that particular individual and how they deal with it. And so, as I said before, I would hope that we gain a stronger understanding of this societally, and that we are sensitive to it, that it is diagnosed correctly, and then whatever is needed, whether it's drug therapy or whether it's reconditioning socially therapy, to help those people get back into life.
Yes, absolutely, mate. And that is the issue. And as we talked about earlier on in the piece, that it doesn't just have to be a war type of event. It is, and some people say it's a fear or it's a reaction to that. It can be just constant levels of stress that continually bring you back.
For sure. I remember my mother said, when I was in my teenage years, and my father was certainly alive and he didn't mind her saying, but she said she would wake being either kicked in the back, pushed in the back, and yelling, hearing my father yelling, for God's sake, put your head down, get down.
And they're back there again.
And he's just like what the Mayo Clinic says, they have bad flashbacks, they go into it. So she would just calm him and say, I'm right here, it's Barbara.
Yes.
I'm right here. And he would just fall back to sleep, and he would have no memory of it in the morning.
Yes.
And so she learnt after a couple of times, I won't even bring it up, because he's being honest, I didn't do that, did I? And so, look, as we get near the end of this, I think I'm really taught to focus on this by my father saying to me when I had to put in for national service in 1969 and Vietnam was fighting, and we had something like 50,000 Australian military personnel in Vietnam, in both Air Force, Army and Navy. And again, I've said it on the show, my father's background was a bush boy. He came from the bush. He rode 12 miles to school and 12 miles home every school day. And he'd go out and he'd hunt with his dog, because my grandmother would ask, we need more bunnies for the shearers' pots. And he'd do all that. And I was really, and I've seen some, dead animals that have, died rather violently, but they're animals. And my father said to me when he talked about how he didn't want me to go to Vietnam, and his words that have stayed in my mind ever since, and he said, there's nothing more obscene, David, than seeing a man that you've just shot and killed, and you walk up and see the mess that the high-velocity bullet that you fired at him did.
Look, I think any parent wouldn't want any child to go through that component what they experienced. And we should mention Vietnam and Korea and so forth, because they had exactly the same experiences.
Afghanistan, as recently as that, Australians have been subject to it, but his
Actually,
attitude...
that's a good point. I did meet a number of people who came back from Afghanistan and Iraq, and where they couldn't complete sentences, went back into the roles that they did before they went, and couldn't complete sentences, were just completely, I wouldn't say not interested, just disconnected.
But it also requires the home front to approach it in a different way. And we've all gone through in the last few years the question of the breach of law by this Ben Roberts-Smith in gaining his Victoria Cross and the group. Now, I followed the court case in that, and on one side, he was an outright bully, a thug, and as Justice Pasenko said, a murderer. Now, it's all very well for us to sit here and make these statements, but it made me think, if we went back through the 102 Victoria Cross winners in Australians and looked closely at how they got that Victoria Cross in the First World War, the Second World War, Vietnam, and now in the Middle East, you'd probably find breaches of international law in all those.
Yes.
But
look, it's funny. There are certain vocations that attract bullies and thugs, and and they're out there.
They are now, and so there's now, as you're aware, there's now investigations, and we're on the verge of setting up war crimes trials against our own for breaking the rules of war. So the question is, should we? Should they be prosecuted? And one side you can say, of course, the difference between us and the Taliban is we operate by certain rules of war. But then the question comes, yes, that might be so. But when bullets are flying and people are yelling and screaming and dying around you, and you're faced with a civilian who quickly darts in front, trying to get away, and you pull the trigger a few seconds, too soon, it's easy to sit, isn't it, and look at things. So I hope these trials that are going to take place are conducted fairly, on the evidence, and the people charged are listened to.
Look, I loved what you said earlier, mate, that history is recorded, or even defence forces and governments have recognised that people who were charged with cowardice in certain days were pardoned, and that was just due to a complete lack of understanding. And
I think, to end off with, we've been talking about post-traumatic stress disorder. I'll repeat it again. It's defined as a mental health condition that is triggered by a terrifying event. And that's the key to this, that terrifying event, either experiencing it themselves or witnessing it. And symptoms may include flashbacks, nightmares. I know from my mother telling me my father suffered dreadful nightmares, and severe anxiety. He never showed that, but as well as uncontrollable thoughts about the event. I wouldn't know. He never shared his thoughts other than saying that it was awful.
Yes.
And that you never, ever want to be involved in taking the life of another human being.
David Ashton Lewis, thank you very much for your time this morning.
Oh, thank you, as always.
You've been listening to 4CRB's interviews and talkback series. Support local online content and become a financial supporter today at 4crb.com.